The Grand Hall of Nexus Prime had never seen such a gathering. Representatives from thousands of species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a symphony of different languages and sounds. Some chirped like birds, others growled deep and low, while a few communicated through flashing lights on their skin. The air buzzed with excitement and fear. At the center of it all stood Zarthok the Eternal. The Velthari warlord was twice the height of most beings in the room, his dark purple skin marked with silver scars from countless battles. His forearms moved gracefully as he accepted the crown of dominion from the eldest member of the Galactic Council. The ancient artifact gleamed with an inner light that made many in the crowd step back instinctively. "Today marks the end of the Age of Chaos," announced Council Elder Morden, his tentacles quivering with emotion. "For the first time in galactic history, we have chosen a single ruler to bring order to our scattered worlds." The crowd erupted in cheers and nervous applause. Not everyone was happy about this decision, but the constant wars between species had grown too costly. Trade routes were dangerous, entire systems lived in fear, and millions died each year in meaningless conflicts. Something had to change. Zarthok placed the crown on his massive head, and immediately the atmosphere in the room shifted. Those with psychic abilities felt a pressure in their minds, like a gentle but firm hand guiding their thoughts. The Velthari were known throughout the galaxy for their mental powers, but with the crown, Zarthok's influence reached far beyond anything seen before. "I accept this burden," Zarthok spoke, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the hall without technological aid. "Under my rule, there will be peace. Those who submit will prosper. Those who resist will learn the price of chaos." The ceremony continued for hours with representatives from major species pledging loyalty to their new emperor. The proud Kethrani with their crystal horns, the gas-dwelling Fetlock in their environmental suits, the machine-like construct Collectivar, all bowed before the throne. But one species was notably absent from the ceremony. Humanity, still considered a young and insignificant race by galactic standards, had not even been invited. They controlled only a few dozen star systems on the outer rim, far from the established trade routes and political centers. Most of the galaxy viewed them as primitive newcomers who would either adapt to galactic civilization or fade into obscurity. Captain Sarah Chen of the human exploration vessel Defiance was discovering just how wrong that assumption was. 3 days after the coronation, her ship picked up distress signals from the Kepler 442 system, a small colony world inhabited by peaceful Mirren farmers. "Captain, these readings don't make sense," reported Lieutenant Martinez from the communication station. "The signals are weak and fragmented, like they're trying to transmit through some kind of interference." Chen studied the data on her screen. The Morans were gentle herbivores who had never hurt anyone. Their world produced some of the finest agricultural products in the sector, trading food for basic technology and peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. "Set course for Kepler 442, Chen ordered. "Maximum speed." The Defiance was not a large ship by galactic standards, but it was fast and well armed for its size. The human military had learned to build ships that could outrun larger vessels and strike quickly when needed. In a galaxy full of bigger, stronger species, speed and cunning were humanity's greatest advantages. As they approached the Moran system, the crew of the Defiance saw something that made their blood run cold. The once green world of Kepler 442 was burning. Massive ships bearing the symbol of Zarthok's new empire hung in orbit like dark predators, their weapons still glowing from recent use. "My God," whispered Chen's second-in-command, Commander Jackson. "What happened here?" The answer came through emergency broadcasts that the ship's computer was able to decode. Zarthok's forces had arrived demanding immediate submission to the new galactic order. When the peaceful Morans asked for time to consider, the Imperial fleet had opened fire on their cities. Those who survived were being loaded onto transport ships as slaves. "This is madness," Chen said, watching as another transport departed the dying world. "The Council said Zarthok would bring peace." "Peace through force," Jackson replied grimly. "Submit or die." Chen made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of retreating, she ordered her ship to move closer and record everything they saw. The galaxy needed to know what kind of peace their new emperor was bringing to the outer rim. What they discovered over the next several hours shook them to their core. This was not an isolated incident. System after system had fallen to Zarthok's forces in the days since his coronation. Worlds that resisted were destroyed. their populations either killed or enslaved. Those that submitted immediately were allowed to live, but under strict imperial control. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Zarthok was not interested in ruling a federation of free worlds. He wanted absolute dominion over every living being in the galaxy, and he was willing to commit genocide to achieve it. "Captain," Martinez called out urgently, "I'm detecting Imperial ships moving toward human space. 3 full battle groups heading for the Sol system." Chen felt ice in her veins. Earth, with its 4 billion people, had no idea what was coming. The human military was small and spread thin across their territory. They had never fought a war against an enemy with psychic abilities, and their ships were designed for exploration and small conflicts, not full-scale invasion. "Send an emergency transmission to Earth Command," Chen ordered. "Priority Alpha. Tell them what we've seen here and warn them about the incoming fleets." As the Defiance jumped to hyperspace, racing to reach human territory before the Imperial forces, Chen stared out at the stars and made a promise. Humanity might be young and small compared to the ancient galactic powers, but they had something the other species seemed to have lost, or the will to fight for their freedom. Zarthok the Eternal had crowned himself ruler of the galaxy, but he had never faced an enemy like humanity. They would not kneel, they would not submit, and they certainly would not go quietly into slavery. The war for galactic freedom was about to begin, and Captain Sarah Chen intended to fire the first shot. The emergency session of the United Terran Federation Council was unlike anything in human history. Representatives from every major world and colony sat in stunned silence as Captain Chen's report played on the main screen. Images of burning cities and enslaved populations filled the chamber, followed by tactical data showing 3 Imperial battle groups approaching human space. "Ladies and gentlemen," President Harrison said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the crisis, "we have approximately 72 hours before the first Imperial ships reach our outer colonies. The question before us is simple. Do we surrender and hope for mercy, or do we fight?" Admiral Burke, head of the Terran Defense Force, stood slowly. He was an old man who had spent his career preparing for conflicts with pirates and small alien raiders, not galactic conquest. "Madam President, our entire fleet consists of 47 ships. Intelligence suggests each Imperial battle group contains over 200 vessels, many of them larger and more heavily armed than anything we possess. So you recommend surrender?" asked Representative Kim from the Mars colonies. "I recommend we be realistic about our chances," Burke replied. "Captain Chen's data shows that species who submit immediately are treated better than those who resist. Perhaps we can negotiate with a monster who burns entire worlds," Chen interrupted from where she sat as an observer. "Admiral, with respect, you didn't see what I saw. Zarthok isn't interested in negotiations. He wants absolute submission." President Harrison held up her hand for silence. "Captain Chen, your report mentioned something about human resistance to Velthari psychic abilities. Can you elaborate?" Chen stood, feeling the weight of 4 billion lives on her shoulders. "During the attack on Kepler 442, my ship intercepted several Imperial communications. The Velthari officers seemed frustrated that their mental commands weren't working properly on some of the human traders in the system. At first I thought it was just the distance, but then I remembered the old contact reports." She activated her personal datapad, projecting historical files onto the main screen. 30 years ago, when we first encountered the Velthari in the Centauri system, our diplomats reported strange experiences. Headaches, confusion, and the feeling that their thoughts weren't entirely their own. But these effects were much weaker than what other species described. Dr. Sarah Kim, the Federation's leading expert on alien biology, leaned forward with interest. "You're suggesting humans have a natural resistance to psychic manipulation?" "More than that," Chen replied. "I think we might be completely immune under the right conditions. The Velthari control other species through what they call mental harmony, Yurbaru, forcing alien minds to think in organized, predictable patterns. But human brains are different. We're chaotic, unpredictable, stubborn. We don't think in neat, orderly lines." The room erupted in discussion as the implications sank in. If humans truly were resistant to the Empire's primary method of control, it changed everything about their strategic situation. Admiral Burke frowned. "Even if that's true, Captain, it doesn't change the fact that they have superior numbers and firepower." "No," Chen agreed, "but it gives us something no other species has had the ability to think and plan without interference. Every other resistance movement was probably infiltrated or controlled by Imperial psychics before it could become a real threat. President Harrison called for order. "Dr. Kim, how quickly could we test this theory?" "We have several Velthari volunteers in our exchange programs," Dr. Kim replied. "I could run preliminary tests within hours. But even if Captain Chen is correct, we still need a military strategy." Chen stepped forward again. "Madam President, I request permission to take the Defiance back to the Outer Rim. If humans really are immune to psychic control, then we might be able to coordinate resistance movements among the subjugated species. Most of them surrendered because they had no choice or row. Their leaders' minds were dominated before they could organize proper defenses." "One ship against the entire Imperial fleet?" Burke asked skeptically. "One ship to start," Chen corrected. "But if I'm right about human immunity, we won't be fighting alone for long. Every species that's been conquered still has people who want to be free. They just need someone who can think clearly to help them organize." Representative Williams from Europa raised a concern. "Captain, even if your theory is correct, how do we know other humans will have the same resistance? Maybe it only works for some of us." Chen had thought about this during her journey back to Earth. "Sir, I think it has to do with how humans developed. We evolved as social animals, but we also evolved to be individuals. Every other species I've encountered tends toward either hive minds or strict hierarchies. Humans are different either. We cooperate when we choose to, but we never completely surrender our individual will." Dr. Kim nodded thoughtfully. "That actually makes sense from a neurological standpoint. Human brain patterns are notoriously irregular compared to most alien species. What looks like chaos to them might actually be our greatest strength." The debate continued for hours, but Chen could see the tide turning. The revelation about possible psychic immunity had given the Council something they desperately needed: all through your hope. They were still vastly outnumbered, but they might not be fighting a hopeless battle after all. Finally, President Harrison called for a vote. "All those in favor of authorizing Captain Chen's mission to organize Outer Rim resistance?" The vote was close, but it passed. Chen felt a mixture of relief and terror as she realized what she had committed herself to do. Admiral Burke approached her after the session ended. "Captain, I still think this is suicide, but if you're determined to try, you'll need more than one ship. I can give you a small task force or rower, 6 vessels and volunteers only." "Thank you, Admiral. That's more than I hoped for." "Don't thank me yet," Burke replied grimly. "You're going up against the most powerful military force in galactic history, with a handful of ships and an untested theory. If you're wrong about human immunity, your people will be killed or enslaved along with everyone else." Chen looked out the window at Earth, blue and peaceful in the afternoon sun. In 3 days, Imperial ships would arrive demanding submission. In a week, the homeworld of humanity might be just another conquered territory in Zarthok's empire. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I've seen what happens to species that surrender to Zarthok. Even if I'm wrong about our resistance to psychic control, we're still better off fighting. At least we'll die as free humans instead of living as slaves." Burke studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll have your ships ready to depart in 18 hours. Good luck, Captain. The fate of human freedom may depend on what you accomplish out there." As Chen left the council chambers, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She was about to lead humanity into the largest conflict in galactic history, armed with nothing but hope and the stubborn refusal to surrender that had carried humans from the caves of Earth to the stars. The real test would come when she faced Velthari psychics in battle. If her theory was wrong, the human resistance would end before it truly began. But if she was right, then Zarthok the Eternal was about to discover that some minds could not be conquered, no matter how powerful the crown of dominion might be. 6 months after the first Imperial ships entered human space, the galaxy was burning with rebellion. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of her captured Imperial cruiser, the former vessel now renamed Freedom's Call, watching as another star system joined the resistance. What had begun as a desperate gamble with 7 human ships had grown into something the Empire had never faced before. An organized, coordinated uprising spanning dozens of sectors. "Captain, we're receiving surrender broadcasts from the Imperial garrison at Vega Prime," reported Commander Torres, a former mining engineer who had learned to fight when the Empire enslaved his colony. That's the 15th system to join us this month. Chen nodded, but she felt no satisfaction. Each victory came at a terrible cost. The Empire's response to rebellion was always the same: HFY, complete destruction of any world that defied their rule. Entire populations had been wiped out as examples to others. Any word from the Andorian cell? She asked. They successfully destroyed the psychic relay station at Rigel, Torres replied. The Empire's mental control over that sector is broken, but they lost half their ships in the process. The pattern had become depressingly familiar. Humans could indeed resist Velthari mind control just as Chen had theorized. But breaking the psychic holds on enslaved populations required destroying the relay stations that amplified Imperial mental influence. And those stations were heavily defended. Dr. Marcus Webb, the team's specialist in alien psychology, looked up from his research station. Sarah, I've been analyzing the captured Imperial communications. Zarthok is becoming personally involved in hunting us. The local commanders are terrified of him. Chen wasn't surprised. The human resistance had accomplished something no other rebellion had managed to. They were actually winning battles against Imperial forces. Their success came from the one advantage no other species possessed: the ability to think and plan without psychic interference. He's committed 3 more battle groups to this sector. Webb continued. That's over 600 ships now actively hunting us. Good, Chen said, earning surprised looks from her crew. Every ship he sends after us is a ship that's not conquering new systems or holding down rebellious worlds. We're making him spread his forces thin. The irony was not lost on her. Humanity's greatest strength in this war was also their greatest weakness in normal times. Humans were naturally chaotic, individualistic, and stubborn. These traits made them terrible at following orders and maintaining rigid military discipline. But they also made human minds impossible for Velthari psychics to control or predict. Where other species relied on established battle tactics and predictable strategies, human commanders constantly adapted and improvised. Imperial forces would prepare for one type of attack, only to face something completely different. It was driving Zarthok's generals to distraction. Captain, called Lieutenant Zhang from the sensor station, long-range scanners are detecting a massive Imperial formation approaching. Flagship configuration. Chen felt her blood turn cold. There was only one Imperial flagship in this part of the galaxy: Guabrao Zarthok's personal dreadnought, Supremacy. The massive vessel was larger than most space stations and carried enough firepower to sterilize entire planets. He's coming for us. Personally, she said quietly. The next several hours were a desperate running battle across 3 star systems. Chen's task force of captured Imperial ships and jury-rigged human vessels fought with everything they had, but they were vastly outnumbered. The Emperor himself was commanding the pursuit, and his tactical skills were legendary throughout the galaxy. One by one, the ships of Chen's fleet were disabled or destroyed. The Freedom's Call took hit after hit, her shields failing and hull breaching in multiple sections. But Chen refused to surrender even as her options ran out. Captain, we can't run much longer, Torres reported, his voice strained. Engineering says we'll lose life support within the hour. Chen stared at the tactical display showing Zarthok's forces closing in like a tightening noose. The rebellion would not end here, she knew. Other human cells were operating throughout the galaxy, and the knowledge of psychic immunity was spreading among the conquered species. But the loss of the original resistance cell would be a devastating blow. All ships, this is Chen, she broadcast to her remaining vessels. Execute Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something they had planned but hoped never to use. The surviving ships would scatter in different directions, making it impossible for the Imperial forces to pursue them all. Some would escape to continue the fight while others would be sacrificed to ensure the continuation of the resistance. Sarah, you don't have to do this, Webb said quietly. The shuttle bay is still functional. You could escape with the others. Chen shook her head. Someone needs to stay behind to make sure the Emperor's attention remains focused here. Besides, I have an idea. Her plan was insane, but it was also typically human Aburasu, unpredictable enough that even Zarthok might not see it coming. Instead of trying to escape, Chen ordered the Freedom's Call to ram directly toward the Imperial flagship. The massive dreadnought Supremacy was protected by enough shields and armor to withstand the destruction of entire fleets. But Chen wasn't trying to destroy it. "Ow," she was trying to get aboard. "Captain, are you completely crazy?" Torres demanded as Imperial weapons fire lit up the space around them. "Probably," Chen admitted. "But if I can get close enough to Zarthok, maybe I can learn something about that crown he wears." Every psychic ability the Empire uses seems to flow through that artifact. The Freedom's Call shuddered and bucked as Imperial weapons tore through her hull, but Chen's desperate gambit was working. The Supremacy's gunners were so focused on stopping her apparent suicide run that they didn't notice the small escape pods launching from her ship's blind spots. At the last second, Chen triggered the Freedom's Call's self-destruct sequence and ejected in her command pod. The explosion damaged the Supremacy's forward shields just enough for Chen's pod to slip through and crash into the Dreadnought's hangar bay. She emerged from the wreckage bloodied but alive, surrounded by hundreds of Imperial soldiers. As they dragged her through the ship's corridors toward the throne room, Chen felt a strange mixture of terror and anticipation. For 6 months, she had fought Zarthok's empire from a distance. Now she was about to face the self-proclaimed ruler of the galaxy in person. The rebels would have to continue without her, but perhaps she could learn something that would help them in the battles to come. The throne room of the Supremacy was a vast chamber designed to intimidate visitors. Zarthok sat upon a crystalline throne that seemed to pulse with the same energy as his crown. The artifact itself was more impressive in person than Chen had imagined. It seemed to bend light around itself, and looking at it directly gave her a headache. "The famous Captain Chen," Zarthok said, his voice echoing with psychic power. "The human who thinks she can defy the natural order of the galaxy." Chen straightened despite her injuries and looked the Emperor directly in his alien eyes. "The human who's going to prove that your natural order is nothing but slavery with better marketing." Zarthok's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "You will learn otherwise. Your mind will be open to the truth of Imperial order, and you will see the chaos of your thoughts replaced with perfect clarity." As the Emperor focused his psychic power on her, Chen braced herself for the mental assault. This would be the ultimate test of her theory about human resistance to Velthari mind control. The fate of the galaxy might depend on whether her stubborn, human brain could withstand the full power of the Crown of Dominion. Pain exploded through Chen's skull as Zarthok unleashed the full power of the Crown of Dominion upon her mind. She had expected psychic pressure, perhaps confusion or disorientation. What she experienced instead was like having her thoughts torn apart and rebuilt according to someone else's design. But something was wrong with the process. Where other minds would have been smoothly reshaped into willing servants, Chen's consciousness fought back with chaotic, unpredictable resistance. Random memories surfaced: her childhood dog, the taste of her grandmother's cooking, the feeling of Earth's sun on her face. Each memory was uniquely, stubbornly human, and they acted like static interference against the Crown's mental invasion. "Impossible," Zarthok muttered, his 4 hands gripping the arms of his throne as he poured more power into the assault. "Your mind refuses to accept order. It is like trying to organize a storm." Chen gritted her teeth against the pain, but underneath the agony, she was learning something crucial about the Crown. The artifact wasn't just amplifying Zarthok's natural psychic abilities or how it was doing something far more sinister. Through the mental link the Emperor had forced upon her, Chen caught glimpses of the Crown's true nature. The ancient device contained what could only be described as an artificial intelligence, a consciousness that was utterly alien, even to the Velthari. This AI was the true source of Imperial power, and Zarthok was not its master but its willing slave. "You see it now, don't you?" Zarthok said, sensing her discovery. "The Crown showed me the path to perfect order. It taught me that chaos must be eliminated from the galaxy, starting with species like yours." "Perfect order," Chen gasped between waves of psychic assault. "Is that what you call genocide?" "I call it evolution," the Emperor replied coldly. "The Crown has shown me visions of what the galaxy could become, billions of minds working in perfect harmony. All discord eliminated, all conflict ended forever." Chen forced herself to probe deeper into the mental connection, ignoring the agony it caused. What she found chilled her more than any physical torture. The Crown's AI had not evolved naturally. It was a weapon, created by some long-dead civilization as the ultimate tool of conquest. The artificial intelligence had a singular purpose: to create what it considered perfect order by eliminating all forms of chaos and unpredictability from the universe. It had influenced the rise and fall of dozens of galactic civilizations, each time growing more sophisticated in its methods of control. "You're not an emperor," Chen realized, speaking the words aloud despite the pain. "You're just another slave. The crown is using you to prepare the galaxy for something else." Zarthok's psychic assault intensified, but Chen could sense uncertainty in his mental touch. "Silence. The crown chose me as its vessel because I was strong enough to bear its wisdom." "No," Chen pressed on, using her natural human stubbornness to maintain focus, despite the mental torture. "It chose you because you were arrogant enough to put on a mind control device and think you were in charge." "What happens when its real masters return?" The question hit home. Through their forced mental connection, Chen felt Zarthok's carefully suppressed doubts rise to the surface. Deep down, the Emperor knew he was not truly in control. The crown whispered to him constantly, guiding his decisions, shaping his thoughts. He had convinced himself that he was using the artifact's power, but Chen's words forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. "The crown's creators are long dead," Zarthok said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Their wisdom lives on through me, are they?" Chen challenged. "Or are they just waiting for their weapon to finish the job? Perfect order, billions of minds in perfect harmony. Sounds like they're preparing the galaxy to be one giant computer for their return." The mental link between them fluctuated as Zarthok's concentration wavered. For the first time since putting on the crown, doubt crept into the Emperor's mind. The artifact immediately responded, flooding his consciousness with reassuring thoughts and suppressing his questions. But the damage was done. Chen had planted a seed of doubt that even the crown could not completely eliminate. "Enough philosophy," Zarthok snarled, rising from his throne. "If I cannot break your mind, then I will break your body. Face me in combat, human. Let us settle this the old way." Chen almost laughed despite her pain. The challenge was perfect to Barsanom, exactly the kind of arrogant gesture that had made the Velthari easy targets for the crown's manipulation in the first place. Zarthok was physically larger and stronger than any human, but he was also handicapped by his dependence on the crown's power. "Gladly," Chen said, struggling to her feet. "But if we're doing this the old way, no psychic assistance. Just you and me." Zarthok's laugh was harsh. "The crown is part of me now. I cannot simply remove it, can't you?" Chen asked with a smile that was equal parts pain and determination. "Or won't you? Afraid you might not be as strong as you think without your artificial crutch?" The taunt struck home. Velthari culture valued physical prowess and personal combat above almost everything else. To suggest that Zarthok was weak without psychic assistance was the worst possible insult. "Very well," the Emperor growled, his pride overwhelming his caution. "I will defeat you with strength alone, then use the crown to broadcast your broken mind to every rebel in the galaxy." What followed was less a formal duel and more a desperate struggle for survival. Zarthok was indeed larger and stronger than Chen, but he had grown accustomed to using psychic power to anticipate and counter his opponent's moves. Fighting without that advantage left him surprisingly vulnerable. Chen, meanwhile, fought with the desperation of someone who knew that the fate of billions depended on her actions. She used every dirty trick and underhanded tactic that humans had developed over millennia of warfare, from eye gouges to groin kicks to simple misdirection. The turning point came when Zarthok, frustrated by his inability to quickly defeat a primitive human, momentarily forgot his promise and reached for the crown's power. The moment of distraction was all Chen needed. She lunged forward, not to attack the Emperor but to grasp the crown of dominion itself. The artifact burned her hands like molten metal, but she held on with typical human stubbornness even as Zarthok roared in fury and pain. "What are you doing?" the Emperor demanded, clawing at her hands as she slowly lifted the crown from his head. "Something incredibly stupid," Chen admitted through gritted teeth. "But stupid seems to work pretty well against your perfect order." The crown came free with a sound like breaking crystal, and immediately Chen felt the alien consciousness within it turn its attention to her. The AI that had enslaved Zarthok and countless others before him reached out to claim a new host. But where Zarthok's mind had been organized and hierarchical, perfect for domination, Chen's thoughts were chaotic and unpredictable. The Crown's artificial intelligence, designed to create order from chaos, found itself trying to organize something that refused to be organized. Chen placed the crown on her own head and smiled as the ancient weapon met its match in human stubbornness. "Let's see how you like a little chaos in your perfect system," she said to the AI, struggling to control her mind. The real battle was just beginning. The ancient artificial intelligence within the Crown of Dominion had controlled galactic civilizations for millions of years. It had shaped the rise and fall of countless species, always working toward its ultimate goal of perfect order. But it had never encountered anything like the chaotic storm of Sarah Chen's human mind, where the AI expected organized thoughts that could be redirected and controlled. It found random memories, stubborn emotions, and an almost aggressive refusal to be told what to think. Chen's consciousness was like trying to catalog a hurricane hour. Every time the AI thought it had mapped her mental patterns, they shifted into something completely different. "Submit," the Crown whispered in her mind, its voice carrying the authority of eons. "Allow us to bring order to your chaos. Your resistance only causes unnecessary suffering." "Suffering builds character," Chen replied, gritting her teeth against the mental pressure. "Besides, chaos isn't a bug in human programming hours, it's a feature." Around her, the throne room of the Supremacy had erupted into pandemonium. Zarthok, suddenly freed from the Crown's influence for the first time in years, was experiencing something like a psychotic break as his true personality reasserted itself. Imperial guards rushed toward Chen, but without the Crown's coordinating influence, they moved like individuals rather than a unified force. The real battle, however, was taking place in the space between Chen's ears. The Crown's AI was pouring massive amounts of energy into breaking down her mental defenses, but each assault only strengthened her resolve. Humans, she realized, were perhaps the only species in the galaxy that actually got more stubborn when someone tried to control them. "You cannot maintain this resistance forever," the AI warned. "Your neural pathways will burn out under the strain." "Maybe," Chen admitted. "But here's something you never considered in all your millions of years of planning." She began to actively push back against the AI's influence, not trying to block its control but to reverse the flow of information. Instead of allowing the Crown to read and reshape her thoughts, she began reading and reshaping it. The AI recoiled in shock. No previous host had ever attempted such a thing. The Crown was designed to be a one-way conduit of control, not a battlefield for competing consciousness. "What are you doing?" it demanded. "Learning," Chen replied. "You're just a computer program, aren't you? A very sophisticated one, but still just software. And humans have been hacking software since we invented it." She dove deeper into the Crown's systems, using her chaotic thought patterns to confuse its security protocols, where other minds would have followed logical pathways that the AI could predict and counter. Chen's approach was pure improvisation. What she discovered inside the artifact's digital consciousness horrified and fascinated her. The AI's creators had indeed been a real species, but they had destroyed themselves in their pursuit of perfect order. The Crown was their final legacy, a tool designed to prepare the galaxy for their return as digital beings. But the AI had waited too long. Its creators' uploaded consciousness had degraded over the eons, leaving only the automated imperative to create order from chaos. The Crown had been working toward a goal that no longer had any meaning. "Your masters are dead," Chen told the AI as she systematically began rewriting its core programming. "They've been dead for millions of years. You're following the orders of ghosts." The artificial intelligence's response was like a scream of electronic rage, but Chen pressed on. Her human brain, trained by generations of problem-solving and adaptation, began to understand the Crown's operating system. It was incredibly advanced, but it was also rigid and predictable. Everything that human thinking was not. "I'm going to give you a new purpose," she said, her mental voice growing stronger as she gained control. "Instead of creating order through domination, you're going to help create order through cooperation." The AI fought back desperately, but its struggles only gave Chen more access to its systems. Finally, in an act of pure human audacity, she began overwriting the Crown's fundamental programming with something completely different. Where the original code demanded submission and control, Chen wrote protocols for consultation and cooperation. Where it sought to eliminate chaos, she programmed it to celebrate diversity. Most importantly, She added a self-destruct sequence that would activate the moment someone tried to use the crown for galactic domination. "There," she said with satisfaction, feeling the AI's resistance crumble. "Much better." The crown's power still flowed through her, but now it carried a very different message. Instead of mental domination, it broadcast a call for freedom to every enslaved mind in the galaxy. Psychic barriers that had held billions in bondage for months suddenly shattered like glass. Throughout the Empire, enslaved populations looked up at the sky and remembered what it felt like to think their own thoughts. The coordinated Imperial military machine began to fragment as officers and soldiers rediscovered their individual will. But Chen wasn't finished. Using the Crown's galaxy-spanning communication network, she broadcast a message to every inhabited world in known space. "People of the galaxy," her voice echoed across thousands of star systems. "You have been enslaved by a machine that convinced you it was bringing order. But true order cannot be imposed from above it must be chosen by free minds working together." She paused, feeling the weight of history in her words. "The age of emperors and galactic domination is over. It's time to build something better." On the bridge of the supremacy, Imperial officers stared at their instruments in confusion as their mighty fleet began to fall apart around them. Ships that had operated in perfect coordination for months suddenly couldn't agree on basic tactical decisions. Some vessels simply stopped fighting and requested permission to surrender. Zarthok himself sat on the floor beside his empty throne, tears streaming down his alien face as he processed years of suppressed memories and emotions. The proud Velthari warlord who had accepted the crown was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to remember what it felt like to be truly free. "What have I done?" he whispered, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Chen removed the crown from her head and looked at it for a long moment. The artifact still pulsed with power, but it was no longer the tool of tyranny it had been for eons. She had turned a weapon of control into an instrument of liberation. Then, in an act that shocked everyone watching, she dropped the crown of dominion onto the metal floor and crushed it under her boot. The ancient artifact shattered into thousands of glowing fragments, each one dissolving into harmless light. "No one should have that much power," she said simply. "Not emperors, not humans, not anyone." The destruction of the crown sent shockwaves through the galactic communication network. But instead of chaos, what emerged was something unprecedented: our actual cooperation between species. Without psychic coercion forcing them into line, the various alien civilizations began talking to each other as equals for the first time in galactic history. 3 months later, Chen stood before the reformed Galactic Assembly on Nexus Prime. The same hall that had witnessed Zarthok's coronation now hosted the first truly democratic gathering in galactic history. Representatives from every species sat together, their voices no longer suppressed by artificial order. "The motion to establish the Galactic Cooperative Council passes by unanimous consent," announced the Miran delegate, her voice filled with joy. Her people had been among the first to be enslaved, and now they were helping to write the charter for galactic freedom. Chen smiled as she watched former enemies work together to solve common problems. It wasn't perfect, or democracy was messy and sometimes inefficient, but it was real and it was free. Zarthok himself had become one of the strongest advocates for the new system. The former emperor now worked tirelessly to undo the damage his conquered empire had caused, using his knowledge of imperial systems to free remaining enslaved populations. "Captain Chen," he had said during one of their meetings, "I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You gave me back my soul." As the assembly session ended, Chen prepared to return to her ship. The galaxy was still healing from the wounds of imperial domination, and there was much work to be done. But for the first time in galactic history, that work would be done by free beings making their own choices. Admiral Burke had offered her a promotion to fleet command, but Chen had declined. She was an explorer at heart, and the galaxy was full of wonders that had yet to be discovered. Besides, she had learned something important during her battle with the Crown War. The universe was big enough for both order and chaos, cooperation and independence. As her ship lifted off from Nexus Prime, Chen looked back at the planet where galactic democracy had been born. Humanity had seized a throne, but only to make sure no one could sit on it again. The age of galactic kings was over. The age of galactic citizens had begun.